It's a hot summer's day, and at 19 years old, there are few things more appealing to me than going to a matinee movie. Because there's just something about when it's 90 degrees outside and sunny, going into a darkened theater with the AC just blasting, a giant thing of popcorn, and whatever the latest movie is. To be honest with you, I don't even really care what the movie is that much. I just know that I'm going to be sitting 3 rows from the top, dead center, because that's where all the best seats are. You guys who sit here in the front row, you are built different. Sitting here, now I'm laying back, I'm relaxed. The AC, the popcorn, the sound, the movie. When I am in that place, there is nothing that can get me down. Except for today. As the movie gets going, I don't even remember what movie it is, my phone starts buzzing. And at first I ignore the call because I'm at the movies, it can wait 2 hours. But then whoever's calling me calls back, and they call again, and again, and again. So finally I pull my phone out of my pocket, and it kind of blinds me from the light, but I can see that my little sister is calling me. And so I get up and I shuffle across everybody. I go down the stairs. I go into that little corridor, and I answer the phone and say, "What? Hey, what do you need? I'm at the movies." And my little sister replies, "Dale, you have to come home. The police are here." My parents have been going through a pretty acrimonious divorce, and today apparently they've gotten into some kind of domestic dispute. And their stories conflict. The police have been called, and the sheriff's deputies are like, we're just going to detain them both. And so I need to come home and address this emergency. So I'm like, okay. So I go back up to my seat, my perfect seat. I roll up my giant thing of popcorn, and I head to the lobby. And on my way out, I see at customer service if I can get a voucher to come back and see my movie. Because it's a matinee ticket. It's only $8, but it's 2010, and that's also my hourly wage. And so I go up to the counter and say, "Am I having a family emergency? Is there a way that I could come back and see this movie?" They smile at me. They give me a voucher without protest. That's probably the nicest that anybody's going to be to me for the rest of the day. I open the door of the multiplex, and I step out into a sunny parking lot, and I get into my 1997 Toyota Corolla with 200,000 miles on it and a broken air conditioning, and I drive home. As I pull up to the house, sure enough, there's 3 cop cars there on the street. And so I park on the street like I always do, and I get out and I start walking towards the house. And as I walk towards the house, I peer into the back of one of the police cars that's in the driveway, and there's my dad sitting in the back seat. And he looks at me and just kind of shrugs. And so I head toward the front door, and my mom is being led out by 2 deputies. She's not in handcuffs, but she is definitely headed towards one of the other police cars. And as I approach her and she approaches me, she says, "He's a liar. I did not hit him." I don't really say anything. I'm kind of dazed in that moment, if I'm being honest. My maternal grandparents are there, and they're kind of standing on the front lawn. My grandfather, he scoffs at me as I start to gather all of the things from the ground that were in my dad's pockets when they detained him and emptied his pockets. They get in the cars, and they drive off, and they're going down to the deputy station on Grand Avenue in Walnut. And somehow, I am tasked with calling up my parents' siblings to see who wants to bail out whom on this sunny afternoon. I start with my Uncle John, my mom's brother, and that's a relatively easy conversation. He's like, "Sure, I'm there, I'll be there," and that goes relatively smoothly. Then I turn my attention to my dad's brother, Jeff, and Jeff is ever the frugal man, so I have to spend a few minutes negotiating with him and letting him know, yes, I know my dad well enough that he doesn't want to spend the night in there just to see what happens tomorrow. We should probably work on a way of getting him out of there. But after a little bit of convincing, I convince him, and so that's all squared away. So while everybody's getting their money right, I make dinner for my sister who's in high school and my brother who is in middle school, and then we all convene on Grand Avenue in Walnut at the deputy station, and they're gonna let my parents out. They'll let my mom out first, she goes with my grandparents. They'll let my dad out, I drive him home. Now, to my mind, I am the hero of this story. I'm 19 years old. Nothing you college students who are 19 years old, my brain is not fully developed at 19 years old. And as far as I can tell, I have kept my stuff together better than any of the other characters in this story. I have navigated an incredibly emotional and difficult situation. It's been a long day, and it has ended in a peaceful resolution, at least for the day. Everybody is sleeping in their own beds. Not everybody sees it that way, though, because in some divorces, like, you don't get to play Switzerland. And it seems like on both sides, there's somebody or somebodies who are frustrated and angry with me because I helped out the enemy today, whomever they see that enemy as being. And in fact, it was so bad that one of my parents, a few weeks later, after a string of, frankly, abusive and wildly disorienting interactions, decided that they did not want to have a relationship with me anymore. And they said to me 4 words that you never really expect to hear from a parent, especially when you're just trying to help. And those words are, "You're dead to me." And those words were uttered with the help of alcohol, but they were no less sincere or lasting because of it. My life was different after that day. 9 summers later, those words are still in effect, and I'm sitting in a different air-conditioned room, in a hospital room, and I'm holding my firstborn son in my arms. And as I look down at that little sleeping baby face, I'm hit with just a wave of visceral emotion as a thought spontaneously pops into my head. And the thought is this: what horrible excuse of a parent would tell their child, even think of telling their child, "You're dead to me," let alone actually meaning it. What I know now is what I should have realized then, is that I had been carrying around those 4 words for the better part of a decade as though they were a giant rock in a backpack. And for 9 years, I had thought that it was my duty to carry those words with me. You have a backpack too. And in it there are many rocks. Some of them are big, some of them are small. But each of them, a time when a friend, a family member, a loved one hurt, betrayed, acted unkindly towards you. And so you took that rock and you put it in the backpack. If you're like me, every wrongdoing, a rock that you thought like, "Oh, you handed this to me. Now it's my responsibility to hold on to this thing for the rest of my life. So I'm going to put it in my backpack and I'm going to carry it around with me wherever I go." And I want to challenge you with a thought this morning. Maybe it is time this morning, right now, to start the process of unzipping the backpack, taking out the rocks one by one, and throwing them into the depths of the ocean. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dale, and I'm one of the leaders here at Portrait. And this morning, I want to talk to you about forgiveness. Here at Portrait, we've been going through this series called The Framework, where we have been exploring what it looks like to practice and portray the way of Jesus together, to follow him as disciples. And the last number of weeks, we've been exploring what that looks like in the context of our connections with other people. And I truly believe that one of the most foundational aspects of our discipleship, of our walking with Jesus to become like Jesus, one of the most foundational aspects of that is this idea of forgiveness, this practice of forgiveness, this discipline of forgiveness. You know, throughout his ministry, Jesus talked a lot about forgiveness. And there's this one time in the gospel account of Matthew where he is talking to his disciples about this process of what you do when somebody has wronged somebody else in the church. And the whole kind of point of this process is that this person would admit their fault and that they would be welcomed back into the community of the church. And so the goal of it is repair. But at the end of that discourse, the Apostle Peter, he asks an astute question. He says, "Hey, Jesus, how many times am I required to forgive somebody who has so wronged me and allow them back into the fold?" And then he offers a guess. He's like, "What do you think? Up to 7 times?" And as guesses go, it's easy to laugh at Peter. Like you read the New Testament, we always want to laugh at Peter. We always want to make fun of Peter. But if you think about it, like that, as guesses go, that's actually not a bad guess. Like 7 times, like even like that number is symbolic of like completion or maturity or perfection. And so what Peter is asking is there a point at which my forgiveness has reached its full maturity, its full perfection, and if someone offends after that, then they're on their own? I mean, 7 seems like a pretty good number. I mean, for a lot of us, like once is a lot. If you really think about it, like you think about maybe you've been close to someone in your life who has struggled with addiction. And like if they break into your house and steal your wife's jewelry and pawn it for drug money, and you find it in your heart to forgive them just the once, that was pretty generous. Or let's say there's someone who's close to you and you find out they've been saying untrue things about you behind your back. They've been gossiping and it's been something they've been doing for a while. And you find it in your heart to forgive them exactly one time. Like you're a saint, right? Let's say your spouse or your significant other, they hurt or betray your trust in some deep and significant way. And you find it in your heart to forgive them once, and just the once. You feel like maybe you should be walking on water. So 7 times, that is a lot. That's a lot of chances. So you can imagine Peter's surprise when Jesus turned to him and says, Peter, you're not to forgive 7 times, but 7 times 70 times. It's 490 for you who are out there trying to do the math in your head. But even then, the numbers is like, it's symbolic. What Jesus is saying is that you are called to continue to forgive the inexcusable and what the world might think is the unforgivable, and you're called to do it in perpetuity. In other words, it's about the time you start losing count is the time that you are just getting warmed up on this forgiveness thing. And so Jesus says that, and he looks at his disciples and they are understandably stunned. Like that is an outrageous thing to say. That you forgive the inexcusable, you forgive the unforgivable without limit. Like nothing about that is at all reasonable. And so Jesus, he looks out on his disciples who are stunned and they're looking back at him. And he says, you know what, let me tell you a story. So he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who went to settle his accounts. And so he calls in all of his servants and he's settling all his debts with them. And there's this one servant who owes him 10,000 talents. Now, a talent is an ancient unit of measurement that is used to measure silver and gold. And it's difficult for us to know like exactly like what is that in dollars. But just know this, like a talent was like an obscene amount of money, and this guy owed 10,000 of them. So what Jesus is really trying to do, he's trying to say he puts out a figure that is like comically large. So it might as well be like $50 billion. So this guy owes $50 billion to the king, and the king brings him in, and the king says, listen, I know you ain't got $50 billion. Nobody's got $50 billion. It's humanly impossible for you to pay that back. But I need to recoup at least something. So I'm going to sell you, your wife, and your children into slavery, even though that won't even make a dent, but I got to cut my losses at some point and get something out of this. And at that moment, the servant, he falls at the feet of the king and he begs for mercy. He says, please, no, be patient with me. I swear on everything that is holy, I will pay you back every cent. I just need some more time. And the king knows that the servant is just saying anything at this point. It's impossible for him to ever pay this back. But there's something about the desperation of that man in that moment that the king takes pity on him. And he says, you know what? Forget it. Like, I know you can't pay it back. So I'm going to absorb that debt. I'm going to forgive it. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let you go. I don't even have something to compare that to. It would be like if the bank called me and said, good news, Mr. Chamberlain, your mortgage has been paid off. Also, your student loans and your wife's student loans. No need to pay on that for the next couple of decades. You're good. Oh, and by the way, we're going to pay for your kids' tuition too. That would be like a life, my life would be marked by that moment forever. I would be like dancing in the streets. And yet that's what you'd think that this guy would be doing too. And he does. He leaves from the presence of the king. A weight has been lifted. A $50 billion weight has been lifted. He is like going into town. He's whistling. He's skipping right up until the point that he sees somebody who owes him 100 denarii. Now, 100 denarii is not a small amount of money. If we have a better estimate on this one. If we were to estimate 100 denarii in American dollars, it would be like $20,000. Now, think about if somebody owed you $20,000. Like, that's not a small sum. Like, college students, like, you could buy like a nice car with certified pre-owned in cash. $20,000. And so he's like, I can't afford to be losing that kind of money. And so he grabs this other servant, his fellow servant, he grabs him by the neck and he throws him against the wall and says, you need to give me my money or I'm going to hand you over to the authorities and you are going to be put in jail. And in that moment, the fellow servant, he says, please, no, I swear on everything that is holy, I will pay you every cent. Just be patient with me. I need more time. And in that moment, the servant says, that's not good enough. And so he calls the guards and he has that man carried away into prison. This happens like in the town square in front of God and everybody. And everybody who saw that is like more than a little bit unsettled. They're like, yo, isn't this the dude who got like the $50 billion loan forgiveness from the king? Like, why is he hassling? I mean, $20,000 is a lot, but like, it's not that much compared to what he owed. It's not even a fraction. Eventually, word gets back to the king. And the king calls the servant in and he says, you wicked servant, I forgave you a debt that is just incomprehensible. And yet the second that you leave my presence, you can't find it in your heart to show even a shred of kindness to somebody else who owed you. And the king, he calls his guards and he locks this man in prison until such a time as he can repay that unpayable debt. Jesus tells that story, and then he looks his disciples in the eye, and he says this, so also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Unless you think that Jesus is saying something crazy as a one-off, he's actually just repeating something that he's already said in this very same gospel account, where he says, for if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Just for a moment, I want to sit in the discomfort that those words bring. If you do not forgive, then you do not stand forgiven. Like, Jesus really meant that. I just want to sit in the discomfort that brings for just a moment. Earlier, I was talking about backpacks and rocks. How we carry those around with us. Each of those offenses. What are the rocks in your backpack that Jesus is calling you to take out and to cast aside this moment? You know, we're not without good reason for carrying those rocks around. You know, for a lot of us, we think like a rock is a pretty good weapon, whether in self-defense or in retaliation. So, you know, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to hang on to that in case that person comes back around. I have something to throw at them. But really what ends up happening is that as we collect those rocks and collect more rocks, we end up being crushed under the weight of our own unforgiveness. You know, in the story, Jesus, he talks about the king calling his guards to take this man into prison. If you look at the Greek in that text, the word that's literally used there literally means tormentors. And there's a lot of ink that's been spilled talking about why it is that Jesus and Matthew chose to use that exact word. But suffice it to say this, that to live a life where we refuse to forgive is to lead a torturous existence. Have you ever spoken to somebody who has not only kept their rocks, but has spent an extensive amount of time cataloging their rocks, looking at them, weighing them, looking at their shape and their color, arranging them, and putting them all together into this mosaic of pain and suffering that has become their life story? Like they keep all of those rocks, and what ends up happening is that they are living in some kind of a personal hell. And to be honest, it can be kind of a hellish experience even to like be in proximity to them. And like, listen, forgiveness is not instant. Like sometimes you got to take the rock, you got to look at it, you got to look at it again, you got to look at it for a while before you're ready to chuck it. But hear me when I say this, that if you become a professional rock collector, you will end up using those rocks to build your own personal prison. And in that place, the grace of Jesus means very little to you. Because Jesus isn't saying that when he says that if you don't forgive, then you aren't forgiven. He isn't saying like you have to earn your relationship with him or you have to earn your salvation by doing good works, by forgiving other people. But it is to say that if we don't understand or buy into the fact that forgiveness is at the root of who Jesus wants us to become, then we don't understand really who he is or what he came to do. If you don't get forgiveness, then you don't get Jesus. I don't know if you know this, but that's kind of his whole thing. That's the reason that God took on human flesh and dwelt among us, so that he could be reconciled to us, that by his death, at the cost of his life, that our debt, our eternal debt, could be forgiven. That he has taken your death, he has absorbed it, he has forgiven it, and in return, he is offering you his life. Jesus has forgiven you, he will forgive you way more than 70 times 7. He has no rocks. He has cast them all aside. So for us to receive such a grace, for us to receive such a wonderful forgiveness and to have no value for it or no desire to give that to others, it begins to call into question whether we really, truly, honestly have received it in the first place. Okay, now I want to give you some caveats. Now that we've sat in the discomfort. Because if we walk out here feeling condemned and discouraged, then I missed the mark. But if we walk out here feeling sobered and ready to engage, then Jesus is probably speaking to us. Because here's the bottom line. If you follow Jesus, if you say, I am a follower of Jesus, then forgiveness is not optional. I double checked. I honestly did. It's not optional. But what is forgiveness and what is forgiveness not? Because I don't want us to think that we're being called to do something that we're not being called to do. I don't want us to be clear about what it actually is that we're being called to do. So I have 3 caveats for you guys. And the first one is this. Forgiveness or forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. You know, at some point in your life, there was somebody who was well-intentioned and who had love in your heart to say, you know what? You just need to forgive and forget. Terrible advice. They meant well, but that's just not good advice. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving means not holding something against somebody. But it doesn't mean acting as though it never happened. Sometimes forgiving actually means confrontation. It actually means bringing the offense to the person so that they can admit their fault and join with you. You have to be engaged in it as well. Join with you in the process of repairing that relationship. But even after that, forgiving doesn't necessarily mean that that person has the same access to your life, has the same access to your heart. Forgiving doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries even very firm boundaries. Forgiving is not necessarily at odds with going no contact. But those instances are extreme that involve unrepentant abuse from an unsafe person. They are so real. Those situations are so real. Please hear me when I say that. But it takes a lot of good counsel and discernment and prayer to discern when those are. And I say that, and I'm not saying this is you, this is just something we all have to wrestle with, is that sometimes we use like language of boundaries as a shield or as a cover for our unforgiveness. That we say we're setting a boundary, but really what we're doing is we're taking our power back so that we can inflict pain on that person who hurt us. That does happen. And maybe two things are true at the same time. Like maybe you really do, like that is an unsafe person in their current state. They have a pattern of abuse. That forgiving doesn't mean that you have to stick in there and keep getting punched. Like maybe that is true that you do need those boundaries. But maybe it is also true that you just hate that person. Both can be true at the same time. That is not forgiveness. Forgiveness means being open to reconciliation. Now, reconciliation is a whole different thing. It takes two people. And a lot of times it isn't possible because of that other person and their unwillingness to engage in the process of repair. Reconciliation is on the two of you, but forgiveness is on you. Forgiveness is dropping the rock. Forgiveness is letting go of the hatred that you feel. Because hatred is the result of that unforgiveness. And that unforgiveness is the result of that anger that's been allowed to fester. Now, anger isn't necessarily an evil in itself, but we don't want to either overindulge in it or ignore it. So forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving also doesn't mean ignoring your anger and your pain. In fact, in many ways, real forgiveness isn't possible until you acknowledge your anger and your pain. Because the anger and the pain is the result of something legitimate. Like God has placed in your heart a sense of what is right and true and what is wrong and evil. And so it's actually a testament to God's justice within you that you feel angered, enraged, hurt. But at the same time, the Apostle Paul teaches us, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give the devil no opportunity. A lot of married couples take that to mean that you can't go to bed unless you've resolved your whole argument. That's not a bad practice. That's not terrible advice. But what Paul is saying here is really more of a metaphor. And it's a metaphor of finality. He says, don't let the clay of your anger harden into a brick of hatred. But the anger in itself is not an evil. I mean, honestly, if nothing made you upset, if nothing made you mad, if nothing hurt you deeply, then what is it that you're actually forgiving that person? That's not forgiving. That's called just not being offended. And so the measure of your forgiveness is not how quickly you can stop being upset at that other person. Right? It's not a race to that, to suppress our emotions and say how fast can I get to not being angry anymore, not being hurt anymore, not being upset anymore. The measure of forgiveness is how much hurt and anger and pain that you are willing to set aside. But the anger itself is not the evil, is what we do with it, whether we hold on to that rock or we go about the process of throwing it away. And it is a process. Oh man, it is a long process sometimes. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean ignoring your pain or your anger. And lastly, forgiving is not a linear process. And that's okay. Forgiveness is not linear because it's less of an event and it's more of an orientation. It's less of a thing you do and more of a shape you take as you are being molded by the Heavenly Father. Forgiveness is formation, that we are being formed in the way of forgiveness. And it's a process. And it's not actually unlike the grieving process. Where, yeah, there's that anger on the front end, and maybe in the middle there's some bargaining of like, what is it going to take for me to be in continued relationship with this person? Sometimes they can give it, sometimes they won't. And then you can get to that place of depression, of mourning. But if you're being formed in the way of forgiveness, then that mourning, it's like multi-layered. The top layer is obvious. I mean, we mourn what has been taken from us, whether that we have lost an actual physical resource, whether it's we've lost trust, innocence, a relationship with somebody who we were close to. We mourn all of those things. It's legitimate to mourn those things that by the evil actions of somebody else, something that is good was taken from you. But that's only the top layer, because if we are being formed in the way of forgiveness, we also mourn for that other person. We mourn the brokenness that led them to a place where they could have wronged us so deeply. Like, what are all the ways that that person was sinned against, abused perhaps, was a victim of circumstance, was not given the adequate spiritual and emotional support and the tools they need to reach a place of healing, that they have folded in over and over again on their brokenness to the point where they were able to do that? Don't answer this out loud, but what is the worst thing that you've ever done? Maybe something comes to mind, maybe not. But like, what were the circumstances in your life that led you to that place? The network of relationships that were unhealthy, the emotional state that you were in, the bad things that had happened to you, the ways that other people abused and wronged you that led you to a place where that is how you responded. Is it possible that many of those things are reflected in the person who has deeply wronged you? And I'm not saying that like everything is like a moral equivalency, or that we can like both sides everything into the ground. But it is to say that at every point, every perpetrator is also a victim. And we mourn that for them. We cultivate brokenness and empathy for them. And it doesn't change what they did. It doesn't minimize the effects of their action. If they are abusive, then you still are not able to be in a relationship with them. But we mourn their brokenness. And here's how you know you've gotten to a place of forgiveness, is that more than wanting them to get what they deserve, what you want is healing. What you want is healing for you and healing for them. Because a lot of times we think that justice is retribution. That I got hurt, you got hurt in equal measure. But the justice of Jesus is not retribution, it is healing. It is wholeness. It is repair. It is that we begin to become the people that Jesus created us to be, despite that brokenness. But for long as there is that brokenness, we mourn. And it's not a linear process getting to that place. You know, many times I've opened up my backpack and I've thrown a rock only to be traveling down the road, and wouldn't you know it, it's back at my feet. Can you guys relate? It seems like maybe so. And maybe that means I'm walking around in circles. I don't know. But in that moment, it's tempting to pick back up the rock. I carried it for a while. Maybe for some reason I missed it. It's tempting to pick back up the rock because like the empathy that you have cultivated is again kind of burned away by the fire of anger. This is particularly true, at least for me, maybe for you, in situations where repair and reconciliation hasn't been possible. We're in that moment, you see the rock again, and the empathy that you have cultivated through prayer and just considering what it must be to be that other person, it's burned away by the fire of anger. But man, so many times, anger is just a sorry substitute for grief. They were meant to grieve that brokenness. And maybe that, instead of picking up that rock in anger, it's an opportunity to re-enter that moment of grief. Because we do not grieve as those who have no hope. In a world of sin and brokenness, we grieve, but with the hope of restoration, repair, and goodness, and flourishing. And no one did this better than Jesus himself. On the day that Jesus was crucified, he's literally carrying his own cross. He is carrying the instrument of his torture and death up a hill on his already bloodied and beaten back. And as he is doing that, there are people who are spitting on him, who are laughing at him, who are joking about him. And in that moment, Jesus does not respond with anger. He does not respond with curses. In that very moment, Jesus says, "Forgive them, Father. They know not what they do." And when Jesus rose from the grave, this invitation to eternal life extended even to those exact same people. And that's good news for us because in many ways, we are also those same people. But Jesus was pierced for my transgressions. He was crushed for my iniquities. But here's the thing, my friends. By his wounds, I am being healed. And as we continue that process of healing, it is my heart for you that it would lead you to a place where you would forgive the trespasses of others, even as your trespasses have already been forgiven.